running over states of mind, or who should be writing this dissertation anyway? And that's a still from a personal video of me running. Whenever I go for a run, I have noticed I take on a character. I assume a character that I think will help me run further and in better form. When I run, I decide to become an athlete for the time being, even though I have not deserved that title. On a particularly imaginative day, I can clearly hear the radio commentators discussing my strategies as I run. Only, unlike in a real race or competition, I am responsive to what they say about me. My back straightens when they critique my posture. My pace quickens when they question my conservative approach. Maybe this kind of imagining process occupies me. Maybe it takes my mind off the struggles of running. But maybe it makes me that bit more a runner, a real runner, at least for the time being. I have a running character. I have presumed it to be a good character to inhabit when I want to run. But what if I were to take this character out of her usual running context and onto some other terrain? What, for example, could this character have to say about my research, if anything? And who has this character replaced when I decide to research as a runner? Presumably, the runner has in this case replaced some kind of academic character. I think I know this academic character. I have been her too, not when I wanted to go for a run, but when I wanted to learn things for myself and for others, wanted to learn for the sake of learning, learn in a way that stood in for learning in general, as well as in particular. Just as the runner character stands in for the desire to exceed one's physical limits, the academic character stands in for the desire to learn. She not only learns, she is a learner. She teaches us how to learn. The academic character deals with things earnestly, transparently. She is scrupulous, passing her predecessor's work for errors that she can correct or gaps that she can fill for the common good. She believes in this pursuit, believes that the sum total of her efforts might fractionally tilt the future towards a happier trajectory. The academic character, like the runner character, is a means to an end. She is enabling in that regard. She sets me up for success. The academic character acts, speaks, writes by the power vested in her. She not only learns, she is a learner, and this is what helps her learn. And there I am in academic character presenting at a research forum. And you can kind of compare the difference between those two images. Those are kind of two different characters I'm inhabiting in everyday life. My academic character is ethically minded. She worries about truth, worries about the way in which truths are sometimes excluded in the name of consistency, in the name of unifying narratives. She does not tell a lie or bend the truth even a little in favour of her thesis when presenting her evidence. She faithfully reports processes and discloses everything. To tell the truth, she realises she must declare her position within the research community, the global community. She must declare her partiality, her situated knowledge, the contextual nature of her perspective. Be transparent. But sometimes it is precisely in her effort to tell the truth that she commits the pretense and maybe too the pretension of which academics are sometimes accused. Perhaps this road is paved precisely by her good intentions. I will attempt to show how there can be something insincere about the very sincerity with which one adopts their academic character by critiquing one of my own academic articles. Below is an image of a publication to which I contributed along with fellow researchers on the PhD program at Goldsmiths, and in which an early version of The Shape of a Thinking Thing was published and You maybe remember that was chapter 2 of this thesis. So this is an early version of that article that I'd published. So the text starts by making the case that the simplified models we use to picture something more complicated or difficult to imagine are always worth revisiting, since they can often define the very terms on which important debates play out. I presented 3 shapes or models which have been or could be used to think about the mechanics of self, starting with the vessel, then the distributed self, and ending with my own proposition, the line. Now, you've read the latest version of this if you've looked at chapter 2, but here I'm telling you about an earlier version of these ideas where I wrote out that idea a little bit differently, and I'm going to critique the way I did that now. So while writing this article in academic character, which is informed by other academics and the culture of the academy, I did something that I think I did not ultimately intend with the text. The article tries to expose the vessel model as inadequate, misleading, primitive. In its place, the text declares the line model, my model, as if it were an improvement on the last. And in fact, although the vessel model does indeed fail to illustrate some properties of the self that my line model succeeds in highlighting, the vessel model is not wrong, as the article seems to purport. In some ways, it is useful to think of the self as a vessel, a container with something hidden inside. Where the line model emphasizes the agent's receptivity to contagion, the vessel model highlights the hiddenness of the agent, which may well be a fundamental property of agenthood worthy of study. In fact, the flat earth model to which I compared it is not entirely wrong either. It certainly was not poor in its capacity to model reality, because sometimes it is far more useful, and hence in some sense more true, to think of the world as flat than round, when navigating a road map, for instance. What I should have done in the article is simply acknowledge that these shapes, such as the shape of the earth or the shape of a thinking thing, these models and intuitive diagrams, are merely thinking tools that enable us to intuit different properties of a phenomenon rather than presume that some were in need of being debunked and replaced. As mentioned earlier, models are analogous to character insofar as they provide multiple perspectives on a phenomenon. Each model emphasizes certain qualities over others. When one model or character or perspective is selected, it is always done at the cost of another model, character, or perspective. What I should have done in writing my article is to present the vessel and my proposed line as 2 different models of thinking things that emphasize different properties at the expense of those they do not emphasize. Yet the article implies that my line model is superior to the vessel model. In time, when I read over the text now printed so coolly in the publication, the clean typography betraying not even a trace of doubt or hesitation, I wondered why I had done that. Did I really believe at the time that the line was superior to the vessel, the latest improved model within a series of gradually better ones, as in a linear ideal of progress? Having assumed the academic character within the space of writing, I inflated the shortcomings of the vessel model and at the same time exaggerated the utility of my line model in order to achieve a familiar scholarly movement, namely, the movement by which a gap is identified and then promptly filled, thereby making a contribution to knowledge. If you're not familiar with this language, often academics, one way of conceptualizing the work that they do is that they're there to fill a gap in knowledge. So part of your work as somebody whose job it is to make new knowledge is first to identify a gap in knowledge, something that we don't understand very well, so that then you can contribute to knowledge. You can fill that gap through your own research. I'm building up to this point that when you are an academic and adopting the character or role of an academic, you might be quite motivated, and it's sort of instilled in you to be looking for gaps. And in my case, I was identifying the vessel as a certain kind of gap, that it was not adequate in a way as a model for helping us intuit the kinds of things about self that I wanted to highlight. So there was this gap. But by identifying a gap in the way we conceptualize self, I kind of exaggerated the failures of the vessel model in order to exaggerate also the successes of mine. And that was all unconscious, of course. So that's what I'm building up to, and that's why I'm talking about gaps and contributions. So to continue, oddly enough, it was not even necessary, let alone inaccurate, to disown the vessel model and replace it in order to make my contribution. It would have been valid enough to simply place these models side by side and add my model to a panoply of other ways of understanding a thinking thing. Although upon rereading, the disownment of the vessel model seemed to me disingenuous, at the time of writing, I remember feeling as though I was approaching the task very sincerely. Here's a diagram I drew showing the vessel and line models of thinking things side by side, two different models that offer different highlights to the phenomenon of self. Shortly after I had written my article, I was reading N. Catherine Hale's My Mother Was a Computer. And here I began to read a similar kind of stylistically motivated and unnecessarily inflated kind of antagonism towards preceding theories and their authors. As I will soon argue, this is not Hales's or any individual scholar's fault. This kind of overshooting critique is a symptom of the academic character repertoire as a whole. In Hales's book, I began to recognize this tendency in the section on computational ontology. This is a way of picturing the universe that imagines it to be fundamentally computational. Under this model, the universe is what you get when you run a program on a computational substratum of some kind, and the theory of character in this thesis adopts a computational ontology in that character is imagined to run on the human being. The program that runs the universe may be extremely simple, but as it runs, complexity emerges from it on higher levels of organization. And you can see an example of us discussing this earlier in the Thesis series in section 3.2. Hales charts out a history of this set of ideas, giving credit where credit is due about the findings that promote the computational worldview. Then she proceeds to perform that familiar scholarly maneuver whereby she identifies flaws in previous authors' thinking as a means of preparing the ground for her own contribution. There is nothing inherently wrong with this, of course. It makes a lot of sense as a principle. The scholar must try to improve upon the past work of others. That is the beauty of academic pursuit and why I began such a pursuit of my own. The endeavor to know is collective and cumulative across time, space, and people, and I wanted to know if such a thing would be possible within the field of art practice. Scholars are in an especially good position to attend to this kind of cumulative work as new findings come to light, and one has more observations and data against which to test older theories. Yet, the historical momentum of the academic character works on Hales as she writes her book and occasionally appears to add unnecessary emphasis on the need to highlight the shortcomings of predecessors, rendering some of her criticisms weak or a little unfair. This can happen when a citation is taken slightly out of context in order to be made more vulnerable to critique. Take, for example, the tone Hales adopts when she says that Stephen Wolfram, quote, is not slow to draw sweeping implications from his work, end quote, or that he envisions sweeping consequences for his research. The antagonistic language then escalates into a parodic picture. And this is a quote from that section. Consider now the moment when Wolfram bends over the output of one of his cellular automata and perceives in it patterns strikingly similar to the shell of a mollusk. What exactly is happening in this scene? One way to understand it is as a re-representation of the patterns that emerged from the first-level operations of the cellular automata by another kind of analog mechanism that we can call Wolfram's consciousness. This exaggeration may not have been intentional or calculating in any way. Rather, as academics, we tend to read others in the hope of finding flaws that our unique specialisms can redress. We are incentivized to do so by the career apparatuses that reward us for each scholarly output. Such rewards are not only monetary, although the need to make a living would alone be a valid incentive. As academics, we also hope to derive a sense of fulfillment and meaning from knowing we have, in some small way, contributed to knowledge, and this more idealistic incentive is also forceful. The excerpt from Hales's writing provides only an incidental example of this widespread phenomenon. Since catching myself in the act, I have detected this tendency to overshoot a critique working in a great many scholarly texts, this drive to identify weaknesses in preceding ideas, even when this may not be very accurate or ultimately necessary in order to succeed in making a scholarly contribution. To draw attention to this phenomenon is not to make an attack on the academic community or on the academic character, nor is it an attack on the practice of identifying a gap and filling it. To be sure, as the running character helps me improve my athletic performance by allowing me not only to run, but to be a runner, the academic character is a hard-won enabler of knowledge pursuit. In fact, some authors, like Harold Bloom, suggest that certain misreadings of predecessors, what he calls misprisions, are a necessary part of any creative endeavour. An author must reckon with their inheritance and prepare the ground for the difference they wish to make. Whatever creative output a scholar comes up with, it does something to predecessors, and sometimes that can constitute a form of violence to their work and personal legacy. However, rather than focus on the utility or hazards of misreading predecessors, my purpose here is only to draw attention to the fact that not only do we play characters, characters also play us. The academic character has a certain inertia, and when we don it like an outfit, it can also take us for a ride. Recall that this role reversal is somewhat typical of self-replicating patterns, such as genes and memes. Character, being a system of memes, finds a home in our human apparatuses, and if it is a successful character, likely to be replicated, it will go on to stir the spirits of yet more human apparatuses, as the academic character has done with both mine and Hale's. Certain duties and practices attend the academic character, just as they attend any other kind of character. When I wrote the article in my academic character, it was as if the very character position or frame of mind I adopted made certain decisions for me in advance and determined the kind of knowledge I was able to produce at that moment. Still, this is not in itself a problem. It is necessary to adopt a frame of mind to think, and a character is a frame of mind. Any character that is adopted at any given time will have its affordances and blindnesses. A problem arises when we believe the academic character to necessarily be more sincere, clear-sighted, honest, truthful, or objective than another character, for it comes with its own momentum and drives us this way and that, occasionally making us overshoot in certain directions. Despite engaging in a long-standing practice of having thoughts variously enabled and disabled by the different characters I play, during the first half of my PhD I had fallen prey to the assumption that my art practice was a place from which to deceive and manipulate viewers in the hope of delighting them. Whereas this space, my academic commentary, was supposed to be where I step out of pretending and become honest and straightforward about what there is to learn from these artworks. I've since come to realize that as long as I believe in my own sincerity when adopting the academic character, my dissertation writing will become more insincere, more manipulative than the performance video works. In fact, the artworks are in this sense more truthful than the academic article, since they are sensitive to the movement of character, making observable the passage of character in and out of me, and how it frames my human apparatus in that moment, enabling me to think and do certain things, but not others, for the time I have adopted that character.